Effective immediately, you'll be transitioning out of your role. The chairman's son said it like he was reading a weather report. Calm, bored, like he practiced it in front of a mirror that morning. We were in the executive boardroom of Halverson Pharmaceuticals on the 32nd floor of our Manhattan headquarters. 11 members of the board were seated around the walnut table. 3 federal regulators from the FDA were on a video screen at the far end. The IPO roadshow was scheduled to start in 48 hours. We were the 3rd largest specialty pharma company in North America, and tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Eastern, I was supposed to be the one ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. I'm Thomas Brennan. I'm 56 years old. I've been the Chief Compliance Officer at Halverson for 19 years, and in front of 3 federal regulators in the most important board meeting of the company's history. The chairman's 31-year-old son had just told me to clean out my desk. What he didn't know, what nobody in that room knew except me and one woman in a small law office in Hartford, was that I'd seen this coming since March, and the safety net I'd quietly woven into the IPO documents over the past 7 months. It was already pulling tight. I didn't react. I'd learned a long time ago that the first person to speak after a public humiliation is the one who loses the next round. Instead, I looked across the table at Dr. Eleanor Whitmore, the lead FDA reviewer on the screen. Her face hadn't moved, but her eyes flicked once toward me. That was enough. She'd been watching this company for 15 years. She knew exactly who I was, and she knew exactly who he was. His name was Garrett Halverson, the chairman's son. Hired 6 months ago as Chief Strategy Officer, despite never having worked a day in pharmaceuticals before that. His prior experience was 3 years at a venture capital firm in Austin and a failed crypto startup that left a trail of small investors holding empty bags. But his father owned 41% of the voting shares, so here we were. I have to back up. Tell you how a man like me ends up standing in a boardroom while a kid half his age tries to erase him from a company he helped build from a regional generic drug manufacturer into a billion-dollar specialty pharma brand. When I joined Halverson in 2006, we had 312 employees and a single manufacturing facility outside Cleveland. Old man Halverson, Garrett's grandfather, hired me personally. He'd come up through the chemistry side, knew his molecules better than anyone, but he didn't understand the regulatory landscape, and he was honest enough to admit it. The FDA had just hit the company with a Form 483 over GMP violations, and they needed someone who could speak both languages, the science and the law. I was 37 then. JD from Georgetown, science background from Cornell, 6 years at the FDA's Office of Compliance before I crossed over to private practice. I knew what got companies in trouble, and I knew how to keep them out of it. The old man liked that I didn't try to charm him. He hired me on a Thursday and told me I had until Monday to fix the 4833. I didn't sleep that weekend. But by Tuesday morning, the response was filed and the violations were addressed. 2 months later, the FDA closed the file with no further action. The old man came into my office, shut the door, and slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was a check for $50,000. He said, "Don't ever lie to me, and I'll never lie to you. That's the only rule that matters here." I worked for him for 14 years before he passed. Cancer, pancreatic, fast and ugly. His son Garrett's father, William Halverson, took over as chairman of the board, and a new CEO was brought in from a competitor. William wasn't his father. He cared about share price. He cared about magazine covers. He cared about whatever his country club friends thought of him. But he kept me on because he understood that without compliance, the whole house collapses, and he wasn't stupid enough to forget what his father told him about me on his deathbed. Then last November, William put Garrett in the office next to mine. I knew that day what was coming, even if I didn't know exactly how. You don't put your unemployable son in the C-suite of a publicly traded pharmaceutical company unless you're planning to push someone out to make room. Garrett spent his first month playing on his phone and asking my assistant to bring him coffee. By the third month, he was using phrases in meetings that made the actual scientists wince. Pivot the molecule. Disrupt the trial design. We need to be more agile in our oncology pipeline. I never corrected him in public. That's not what I'm paid for. My wife Karen used to say I had the patience of a glacier, and she meant it as a compliment. She passed 4 years ago. Stroke, 48 years old. Our daughter Hannah was a sophomore in college when it happened. Karen and I had been talking about retirement, about a house in Maine, about finally taking that trip to New Zealand we'd been postponing for 15 years. She died on a Tuesday morning while I was on a conference call with the European Medicines Agency. I didn't get the message until 2 hours later because I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. I think about that every single day. Some prices are too high and you don't even know you're paying them until the bill comes due. After Karen died, work became the only thing that made sense. Hannah and I stopped talking for almost a year. She blamed me. I deserved it. We're better now. She works in publishing in Brooklyn. She's 26. We have dinner once a month and we don't talk about her mother because we both still cry, and grown men and grown women crying in restaurants makes everyone uncomfortable. Garrett didn't know any of that. He didn't ask. He didn't care. To him, I was just the old guy who said no, Art. The guy who killed his ideas. The guy who kept reminding the board that the FDA doesn't care about your branding consultant's opinion when you've got an inspection coming. The thing that actually started this, the trigger, was a memo I sent in early March. Internal only. Subject line, clinical trial data integrity. Concerns regarding HVN 417 Phase 3 submission. HVN 417 was our crown jewel. Oncology drug. Pancreatic cancer treatment of all things, the same disease that killed the old man who hired me. The board was counting on accelerated FDA approval to drive the IPO valuation to $9 billion. Without HVN 417 on track, we were a $4 billion company at best. With it, we were almost 10, but I'd been reviewing the trial data for 6 weeks, and something was off. Not fraud, not yet, but sloppiness. 3 trial sites had irregularities in their adverse event reporting. The contract research organization we'd hired had cut corners on data verification, the kind of thing the FDA finds during a pre-approval inspection, and when they find it, they don't just delay approval. They send a complete response letter that effectively kills the application for 2 years. Sometimes longer. I flagged it. I recommended a voluntary delay, 60 days, maybe 90. Audit the data, fix the chain of custody issues, refile clean. The IPO would push back to the 4th quarter, but the drug would still get approved, and the company would still be worth $10 billion eventually. Garrett called me into his office 2 days after the memo went out. His office was twice the size of mine and had a foosball table in it. He'd taken Karen's old plant. I'd kept it on a shelf in the conference room next to mine after she died, and the cleaning staff had moved it during a renovation, and he had it sitting in his window now. Different pot, painted gold, like a trophy. He told me I was being too conservative. He said, "Tom, we need to think bigger. The market doesn't reward caution anymore. The market rewards velocity." I told him velocity in pharmaceuticals usually means dead patients and federal indictments. He laughed like I'd told a joke. That's when I started building the safety net. I didn't tell anyone, not at first. I called Margaret Donovan, an attorney I'd worked with at the FDA 20 years ago who'd left government to run her own boutique firm in Hartford. Margaret specialized in whistleblower cases, False Claims Act, SEC violations, the dirty back room of corporate America. She took my retainer in cash, and we met at a diner in New Haven once a month for the next 7 months. What I built wasn't complicated. It just required patience and access. 2 things Garrett didn't understand. because he'd never had to earn either one. First piece, the certification. Sarbanes-Oxley requires the CFO and CEO of every public company to personally certify the accuracy of financial disclosures, but the SEC also requires the CCO at a pharmaceutical company to sign off on the regulatory representations in the S-1, the IPO filing document. Specifically, the section that describes the status, integrity, and compliance posture of the company's clinical trial pipeline. Without that signature, the S-1 cannot be declared effective. The IPO cannot launch. The opening bell does not ring. I'd been signing those certifications for a decade. Routine. Boring. Nobody on the board had ever asked me about them. Nobody read them. Nobody understood that a single sentence I'd insisted on adding 3 years ago, at Margaret's quiet suggestion, gave me unilateral authority to revoke the certification at any point prior to the bell ringing if material new information came to light. That sentence was buried on page 847 of our last annual report. I doubt Garrett had ever held a copy of that report, let alone read past the cover page. Second piece, the sealed disclosure. Margaret and I drafted a 46-page document detailing every irregularity I'd found in the HVN 417 trial data. Every email trail. Every meeting where I'd raised concerns and been overruled. Every place the chain of custody had been broken. We didn't make it public. We didn't even file it. We deposited it with the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower, under a sealed disclosure protocol, which meant the agency knew it existed, knew what it contained, and knew exactly when it would be unsealed. The trigger condition for unsealing was simple. If I was terminated, demoted, removed from my role, or pressured to resign within 90 days of any material regulatory filing, the seal would break automatically. The SEC would then have an obligation to act on the contents. Third piece, Dr. Whitmore. I didn't lie to her. I never lied to her. Eleanor Whitmore was the lead FDA reviewer on HVN 417, and she'd been doing this work for 31 years. Over the past 4 months, I'd had 3 off-the-record conversations with her at industry conferences. I'd told her I had concerns. I hadn't named them. I hadn't broken any laws. I'd simply made sure she understood that I was watching, and that if anything happened to me before the application was finalized, she should ask questions. Eleanor had 2 daughters in their 30s. She'd lost her husband to a heart attack in 2019. She'd seen too many companies push too hard and end up with patients dying in trials that should have been paused. She didn't say anything to me directly. She just nodded and said, "Tom, take care of yourself." That was enough. Now back to the boardroom. Garrett was standing at the head of the table where I usually sat. He'd clearly rehearsed this. His suit was new. Bryony, I think, the kind of suit a man wears when he wants you to know he can afford it. His haircut was 48 hours fresh. He had a leather portfolio in front of him with a printed statement. "Thomas, we appreciate your years of service," he said. "But the board has decided that the company needs new compliance leadership going into our next phase of growth. Effective immediately, you'll be transitioning out of your role. Severance details will be discussed with HR this afternoon. Security will help you collect your personal items." He was filming it. Not openly, but I saw the iPhone propped against a glass of water at his end of the table. I'd been in enough rooms to recognize the angle. He wanted footage. He wanted to send it to his crypto bro friends and his Wharton classmates. He wanted to be the kid who fired the dinosaur on the eve of the IPO. I let him finish. I waited. 3 full seconds of silence, which in a boardroom feels like an hour. Then I said, "Garrett, before security comes, you need to understand something. The S1 has not been declared effective. The IPO has not launched, and I am still the Chief Compliance Officer of record on the regulatory certifications attached to that filing." He smiled. He actually smiled. "Tom, that's why we're handling this in an orderly fashion. We have continuity plans." "There is no continuity plan," I said. "Read your own S1, page 847 of the annual report it incorporates by reference. The compliance certification is not transferable. It vests in me personally, by name, until the bell rings tomorrow morning. If I revoke it before then, and I have until 9:25 a.m. Eastern to do so, the offering cannot proceed. The exchange will not list the security. The room went very still. William Halverson, who had been studying his cufflinks, looked up for the first time. The CEO, a man named Doug Pierce, set down his pen. Garrett laughed. The laugh was thinner this time. "Tom, you're not going to do that. You'd be in breach of fiduciary duty." "No," I said. "I'd be exercising a duty I'm legally required to exercise under SEC Rule 408 in the company's own bylaws. And there's something else you should be aware of. As of 7 months ago, I filed a sealed disclosure with the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower regarding integrity concerns I raised in March about the HVN 417 trial data. Internal records will show those concerns were dismissed without remediation by this board, on your specific recommendation. The seal on that disclosure breaks automatically the moment my termination is recorded in the company's HR system." Doug Pierce went pale. He's been through SEC investigations before. He understood what I'd just said. Garrett didn't. He was still smiling, but his eyes had stopped moving the way a person's eyes move when they're thinking. They'd glassed over. "Tom," he said, you can't threaten the company like this. We'll have you arrested for extortion." I looked at the screen. Doctor the screen. Whitmore was watching very carefully. Her two colleagues, the FDA regulators, were leaning forward. "I'm not threatening anyone," I said. "I'm explaining the regulatory architecture you've inherited, which, with respect, I'm not sure anyone has ever explained to you." William Halverson cleared his throat. His voice was hoarse. "Garrett, sit down." Garrett didn't move. "Dad, I've got this. Sit down." The kid sat down. He sat down hard, like someone had cut the strings on him. William looked at me. He'd known me for 19 years. We weren't friends, but we weren't strangers either. He'd spoken at Karen's funeral. He'd written a check toward Hannah's college tuition that I never asked for and never forgot. "Tom," he said quietly, "what would you like to do?" I let the question sit. I'd thought about this moment for 7 months. Margaret and I had wargamed it a dozen ways. The temptation, of course, is to demand reinstatement, apologies, a bigger title, make them grovel. That's the revenge fantasy. That's what Garrett would have done in my position. But that's not what I wanted. "I'd like the record to reflect," I said, "that the events of this meeting have not occurred. There has been no termination, no transition. I will sign the regulatory certification at 9:24 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, contingent on 3 conditions being met before then." William nodded once. "First, Garrett resigns from his position as Chief Strategy Officer effective tonight, along with any other corporate role he holds. He is not entitled to severance, equity acceleration, or any non-compete waiver. He signs a separation agreement drafted by outside counsel, not our internal legal team, that bars him from any position at this company or any subsidiary for 10 years. Garrett made a noise, halfway between a laugh and a cough. Nobody looked at him. Second, the HVN 417 application is voluntarily withdrawn from FDA review, pending a complete re-audit of the trial data by an independent CRO of my choosing. The cost of that re-audit will be disclosed in the S1 amendment as a known risk factor. The IPO valuation will be adjusted accordingly. I estimate this reduces the offering by approximately 30%. Doug Pierce closed his eyes. Third, I retire, effective at 5 p.m. tomorrow after the bell. I'll sign the certification. The IPO will launch with the corrected disclosures, and I'll walk out of the building with the standard retirement package owed to a senior officer with 19 years of tenure. No more, no less. My replacement will be selected by the audit committee using a search firm I approve. The room was silent. William said, and the sealed disclosure stays sealed, I said. Provided all three conditions are met and the company submits a corrected S1 within 30 days. If any material misrepresentation appears in the corrected filing, the seal breaks. But I don't expect any of you intend to make that mistake twice. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Done." I want to tell you that I felt triumphant in that moment. I want to tell you there was some surge of vindication, some cinematic feeling of justice landing. There wasn't. Mostly, I felt tired. The kind of tired you feel when you've been carrying something heavy for so long that you've forgotten you were carrying it, and someone finally takes it from you and your shoulders drop, and you realize how much it had been hurting. Dr. Whitmore was still on the screen. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then she said, in her careful regulatory voice, "Mr. Halverson, the FDA appreciates the company's commitment to data integrity. We'll expect the formal withdrawal letter on HVN 417 by Monday." She ended the call before anyone could respond. I gathered my things slowly. My notes, my pen, a pilot vanishing point that Karen had given me on our 10th anniversary, the reading glasses I'd worn since my mid-40s. I left the conference room without saying anything to anyone, including Garrett, who was sitting with his head in his hands. The hallway outside the boardroom was quiet. The IPO team was still in the conference room down the hall, oblivious. I took the elevator down to my office on the 30th floor, closed the door, and sat in my chair for 15 minutes without doing anything. Then I called Hannah. "Hey, Dad." "Hi, sweetheart. You okay? You sound funny." "I'm okay. I'm going to retire tomorrow." A pause. Then, like, retire? "Yeah." "Wait, what about the IPO?" "It's going to happen. I'll tell you about it. IPO. It's going to happen. I'll tell you about it later. I wanted you to know first." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Mom would be proud of you." I had to put the phone down for a minute. The next morning I rang the bell. The IPO priced at 6.2 billion instead of 9. The market took the haircut in stride. The corrected S1 had emphasized the company's commitment to data integrity, and the analyst community read that as long-term strength. Halverson's stock closed up 4% on its first day of trading. Doug Pierce shook my hand on the trading floor and didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I walked out of the building at 5:14 p.m. The air on Wall Street that afternoon was cold and bright. November in New York. I took the subway home. I'd taken the subway every day for 19 years. I wasn't going to take a car service on my last one. That was 8 months ago. I'm sitting in a kitchen in Camden, Maine, right now. The house is small. 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a view of Penobscot Bay through the pines. Karen had a folder of real estate listings she'd been keeping since 2018, and this house was in it. I bought it in cash with the retirement package and a portion of what I made on the IPO shares I held. Hannah comes up most weekends. We're getting better at talking about her mother. Last weekend she brought a guy named Patrick. I liked him. He's a high school history teacher in Queens. He shook my hand the way Karen's father used to shake hands, which is to say, like he meant it. Margaret Donovan retired 6 months after I did. She and her wife moved to a lake in New Hampshire. We have lunch in Portsmouth every other month. We don't talk about Halverson. We talk about books and grandchildren. Hers, not mine, not yet. But Hannah and Patrick are getting serious, so who knows? About Garrett. I heard through a former colleague that he tried to start a wellness company in Miami last spring, some kind of supplement subscription business. The FTC opened an investigation into the marketing claims within 4 months. The last anyone heard, he was living back in his father's pool house and telling people he was working on a stealth mode AI venture. His Instagram is private now. William Halverson sent me a Christmas card, handwritten. It said, "My father was right about you. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember." I didn't write back, but I didn't throw the card away either. It's on the refrigerator under a magnet shaped like a lobster. Dr. Whitmore retired from the FDA in May. I sent her flowers. She sent me a thank you note that said, "Some of us still believe in doing this work the right way, Tom. Thank you for making my last year easier." HVN 417 was approved by the FDA in September after the re-audit. The data, once cleaned up, was actually stronger than the original submission suggested. The drug is now in pharmacies across the country. Pancreatic cancer patients who would have died last year are alive this year because we did it right instead of fast. I think about that more than I think about Garrett. I think about it almost every morning, watching the light come up over the bay. Some kids don't understand that rules they think are slowing them down are the rules they make the whole thing possible. They look at men like me and they see resistance. They don't see the structure. They don't see the cost. But the structure is there, and the cost has already been paid by men and women who worked quietly for decades because the work mattered more than the recognition. I gave 19 years to that company. I would have given 19 more if the work had stayed honest. When it didn't, I made sure the work stayed honest anyway. That's the only revenge that ever meant anything to me. The kettle's whistling. Hannah's coming up Friday. There's a contractor coming next week to talk about building a writing studio off the back porch. I'm thinking about putting some of this down on paper, the way Karen always said I should. The morning's getting away from me, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. The way I told my daughter, some prices are too high, but some prices are exactly what they need to be. And sometimes the old guard wins after all. I think a lot now about that morning in Camden, watching the light come up over the bay, and I keep coming back to one simple truth. Nothing that happened in that boardroom was an accident. Garrett didn't end up humiliated in front of his father because of luck or karma or some invisible hand of justice. He ended up there because of choices. His choices, year after year, to skip the hard work and chase the easy applause, and mine, year after year, to do the opposite. Cause and effect. That's all it ever is. When Garrett took Karen's plant out of that conference room and put it in his window in a gold pot, he wasn't just being thoughtless. He was telling me who he was when he sat in meetings using words he didn't understand and laughed at me for raising concerns about patient safety. He was building the road he eventually walked down. I didn't push him onto it. He paved it himself, one shortcut at a time. The day I sat across from Margaret Donovan in that diner in New Haven and started building the safety net, I wasn't plotting revenge. I was just refusing to let his shortcuts kill someone else's father, someone else's chance to see their daughter graduate. That's the part I want my own daughter Hannah to understand, if she ever reads this someday. Doing the right thing is not a personality trait. It's a practice. You make the small choice correctly 1,000 times in a row, in rooms where nobody is watching. And one day a room shows up where everybody is watching, and you don't have to think about what to do, because your hands already know. That's not virtue. That's muscle memory, and muscle memory takes decades to build. I wasn't smarter than Garrett. I want to be honest about that. He went to Wharton. I went to a state school for undergrad. He probably has a higher IQ than I do. But intelligence without discipline is just a faster way to crash the car. Real wisdom is knowing what you don't know and being patient enough to learn it from people who already paid the tuition. Old man Halverson taught me that on my 3rd day on the job, and it took me 20 years to fully understand what he meant, the strength to stand in that boardroom and say no didn't come from courage. Courage is overrated. It came from preparation. 7 months of quiet work. a lawyer in Hartford, a sealed disclosure with the SEC, a single sentence on page 847 that nobody else bothered to read. That's not heroism. That's just refusing to be unprepared for the day you knew was coming. If you take anything from my story, take this. The world doesn't reward the loudest voice in the room. It rewards the person who was still working when everyone else went home. Build your character in private. Build your skills in private. Build your safety net in private. And when the day comes that someone tries to take everything from you in public, you'll find that the most important things were never in the room at all.